Alrighty, so this is week 5. We're focusing on diversity in children's literature. Usually in the past of teaching this course, this tends to be the week that sticks with a lot of students. So there's going to be a lot more like supplemental videos that you can watch if you would like to, if this is something that you're interested in. Um, there's going to be more of that involved this week than we normally have. So for this week, there's 2 different articles that you were assigned to read that are really quick. They're kind of more like newsy articles. And some of the questions that I would like for us to think about in terms of looking at those articles are just what were some of your reactions to what you were reading about? What are some questions that you have either about the topic or what was said or how something was said or something that you feel like you want an answer for that you didn't necessarily get? Um, I think it's really, really important if you can think of like one big takeaway from the articles that you want to remember moving forward. That's probably the question that I would say is the biggest one to make sure that you kind of pause and make yourself think about. And the last 2 questions are kind of more based off of like your own personal opinion and experience. So that fourth one is just asking, why do you think that the number of diverse characters is increasing? Both of the articles kind of touch on this, but this is also just kind of asking you to think personally, like what might be influencing an increase in diverse characters. Um, and the very last question is really important, especially if you are going to be going into any sort of job field where any sort of job field, period. Like if you're going to be interacting with other people or having to deal with other people or teaching other people, knowing about how diversity works in literature is really important because it sometimes will help you understand when you come across somebody that has a different experience from you. Um, Kind of their perspective. So it just kind of helps. A big thing with this week is empathy. Um, and I think it's really, really important because we tend to have like our empathy taught out of us or uh, forced to kind of like ignore it. Empathy is really, really important, especially when you read the picture book options for this week. So these are questions just for the 2 articles. And again, you don't have to take notes, but if that's what helps you process, please take notes. If you are more of like a mental, like I'm just gonna kind of remember things and be fine, that's okay as well. When we're talking about diversity, so again, there's gonna be a lot of videos. There's a lot of misconceptions about what we think of when we think of diversity. We tend to think of like race and ethnicity as what diversity is, but there's a lot more to it. Um, this first video, I would really, really, really recommend that you take the time to watch the videos and just kind of think about them. Um, the first one is a pretty like famous TED Talk speech by Adichie. She talks about the danger of having a single story narrative that represents an entire group of people. The idea of the single story narrative is still very, very important. But I do need to acknowledge that like Adichie herself as a figure is incredibly problematic. She has said a lot of really, really harmful things for people in the queer community. But I cannot and have not been able to find a different speech that kind of talks about what we run the risk of when we only consume or are only shown one specific story about a specific group of people. So please take the time to watch it, but bear in mind that like Adichie is like a flawed individual. This is giving us one specific perspective on how to think about diversity, and this is more specifically linked to um, diversity, identity in literature, and then like personal experience. This next example um, is looking at diversity and like language. And so if you watch this, this is a very, very, very different speech compared to Adichie's. This one is actually much quicker. Sorry if the snapping was very loud for you. Um, and she's talking about there's 3 different ways that she has learned to speak English. And so while Adichie's might be, Adichie's might be a little bit more difficult for you to kind of wrap your head around, I guarantee you, even if you only speak one language, this secondary example, you will be able to think of like, oh, I do talk differently depending on who I am around. So this one I think is a really good one for you to potentially like think and sit with a little bit more. Especially if you are coming from like a multi-ethnic background. There's so much code switching that you do. Um, if you're somebody that has multiple languages that you're like fluent in, um, there's a lot of code switching and diversity with that language usage as well. So again, this is just a different perspective on like what can be considered diverse because we tend to get kind of stuck in understanding diversity and there's so much more going on to it. So these are two examples just to kind of help ground us. Um, in terms of like definitions of, okay, so what does diversity actually mean? You could be talking about diversity in terms of race. You could be talking about religion. You could be talking about disability. You could be talking about gender. In terms of like gender representation diversity. And then there's also like the LGBTQIA plus or queer representation diversity. There's also, and this is, I find this really fascinating. Um, International children's literature is also like a specific category of diversity when we're talking about how diversity affects or impacts literature. International children's literature is its own category of diversity. And part of the answer for why is because in the US publishing and marketing for children's literature does not really publish or market or highlight any sort of literature that is published in any sort of other market. It is only it's very much just US centric. So having it as its own category is really great at spotlighting that there is a very big gap of exposing or having options of international representations of children and like stories that children read or hear about or learn from in other like countries. So those, when we're talking about diversity for our class, these are kind of our categories that we are working with. It is not just race and ethnicity. There's a lot more categories to it. And these are just some of the big ones. There's definitely more categories than this, but this is kind of what we're working with for this week. This is going to be probably like the most important literature scholar that I will give you guys for like our entire class. This is Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop. She worked at OSU for a very long time. She has established it's not necessarily a literary theory, but it is a concept that books are windows or books should be windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors for anybody that picks them up. So there is a video of her explaining what that concept is, and it is very, very important for this week and moving forward, and especially if you are going into an education position or field whatsoever, even if it's like technical, even if you're doing like aviation teaching and stuff like that, the concept of if something is written, published, there should be ways that readers are able to connect with whatever or whoever they are reading about. This is like incredibly important. The video is like significantly shorter than the Adichie TED Talk, but you get to actually kind of see Dr. Bishop speak and pay attention to her word choice and kind of what she's emphasizing when she's kind of giving us a definition of what this concept is. Because it's a big concept, I do have some definitions-ish a little bit by Dr. Bishop, just to kind of help frame us. So if her speech, which it is really short, is a little bit too quick for you, this is to kind of like help back it up. So specifically with mirrors, we're worried about if children are picking up books and they can't find a character that looks like them, or a character that acts like them, or a character that thinks like them. They're getting fractured or negative or um, like comical representations of who they see themselves as, and that helps them kind of figure out where they should be in society. And so that is very potentially like very empowering, but also potentially incredibly dangerous. So that's kind of like what books as mirrors are in a very, very short like summary. Um, we're focusing on mirrors specifically because it's one of the things that we see most often with children's literature. There are two other like quick videos of BIPOC people talking about why having that representation in books is really important. Dan Sintat is an author illustrator, and there's two examples of some of his work. Um, he does some really, really cool things. And so the video is him talking about um, like how did he even get into like literature and why it was so important for him to kind of recognize that like no, he is actually like an important person for children's literature. He is doing really important work. And then the second video is talking about um, Asian American, Native American. Oh, it's not Native American. It's like Pacific Islander, um, and other indigenous groups, specifically kind of more towards like the groups that you would find in Hawaii. So you've got like people that are like Filipino, there's a lot of Indonesian representation. So we're talking that's more specifically on kind of like the Asian representation. And there's a couple of authors that kind of talk back and forth about what's kind of happened with representations of Asian characters in children's books recently. Again, they're just other examples. They are quicker videos. There's so many examples of these. I only grabbed just two because I already know this is a pretty video heavy week. Um, books as windows. So looking at the next part of it, we're looking for books um, where um, there is representations for like a specific group that the reader also identifies as. So if you look at the very bottom right, there's Ephraim Divided. It is about a kid who like self-identifies as having multiple ethnicities and growing up on one side of the border in the US and then having to grow up on the other side of the border. So this book is specifically a window for other people reading who have had similar experiences with having to have family on either side of the border or people who have multi ethnicities and trying to deal with like how does that work for them. Show Me a Sign is on the bottom left is about this is if you're a historical fiction kind of person, a super interesting group off of the coast of New York, where the majority of people that lived on the island were actually deaf. It is a very interesting phenomenon that happened. And there's not a lot of deaf representation in a lot of children's books. This is one of the first ones that I kind of was introduced to. So again, you've got a book about a deaf character in a hearing world, but also engaging and interacting with other deaf people. That is a very specific type of reader that is representing. So windows, you want to be able to see yourself as a reflection, but also you are seeing other people that are similar to you. Hopefully that makes sense. This is a really, really tough week. This is here, like content warning, trigger warning. There is a good chance that for a lot of us that grew up in the US, that some of your favorite childhood books had really harmful stereotypes against race, gender, any sort of identity. And so like the next bit might feel like it's kind of like a personal attack on some of your like favorites from growing up. That's not the intention. The intention is to just bring your awareness to like you can still enjoy these, but like it's a little icky. There's a little bit of messiness to it. Okay. Um, Starting off with Little House on the Prairie, there's a very, very quick interview. Um, as an example to kind of explain, if you're not familiar with Little House on the Prairie, one of the biggest issues is how Ma talks about and treats the Native American characters in the series. It is very much like how Native Americans were treated in the US historically. And so just to have that be that mother figure and have so many children learning those same thoughts and those same like ideals is incredibly problematic. Um, I think Ma ends up saying something along the lines of like they're not human, which should be like big red flag warnings. There are other things that the series does really well, but that is something that like one, it's older, um, but two, like, is it worth including as a potential option for kids to read? It's things to think about. Um, Unfortunately, as a society, racism is embedded in our culture. It is not something that we can get away from. If some of these you're like, I don't know what this is, it's okay. These are just visual examples. We've got Bugs Bunny. We have Peter Pan. Um, oh, this is a short. Um, with crows specifically, we've got the Siamese cats from Aristocats. Even Mickey Mouse is not safe. And there's been a lot of like uh, growth about this, but there was a huge and probably still is a huge trend with like mascots of like really like gross, harmful representations physically, but also just naming of mascots. So we cannot exist in our world without coming across racism, unfortunately. Um, Things are getting better, but like this is like where we started kind of a thing. Um, when we're talking about like bad representation, there is racist representation, but a lot of what we see tends to be stereotypes. So I thought it would be helpful to have kind of a definition here, that it's a largely um, believed um, idea or like image of a specific type of person or thing. Um, so it's not something that has like some sort of scientific backing. It's just like something that has been either repeated so often or that we've seen it so often or we've been told about it so often that we kind of just widely accept it. So to give you kind of a less, in theory, a less harmful example, there's a stereotype that like all people that are blonde are dumb or like dumber than people that have different hair colors. Um, there's no scientific backing for that, but for some reason, because of the different figures that we've had as our culture has developed, um, actors, actresses who have been blonde have been portrayed as being like dumber than those around them. So that's kind of something that we've stuck and held on to. Again, just an example. So as we're moving forward, we're worrying about these stereotypes because they can be negative. A lot of them are. Some of them can seem like they're positive stereotypes, and then some of them are definitely just like neutral. But regardless of how they're framed, they are all actually harmful. They put people in boxes, and we are full, complex, messy beings, and putting ourselves into a box um, forces parts of us to not fit, um, forces us to try to like define a lot of the complexities of how we identify ourselves. So it is really important that while like some of these might be neutral stereotypes, they are still harmful. We're coming with more examples. Again, kind of a heads up if you see something and you're like, "Oh no, that was my favorite." It's it's okay. Almost everything that we engage with, it has some sort of problematic issue with it. Being aware of it is a really important step. Okay. Um, Dr. Seuss, we've got some images that are going to be coming up. If it is something that is going to trigger you, please just like skip through it. Um, if you don't understand why it's like harmful, please email me. It's okay. It's kind of hard to give you guys as much as I can without being able to see you in person and kind of be able to bounce off of like what I'm seeing going on. So warning again that there might be something that is somewhat upsetting. Um, the intention is not to be like upset you. The intention is to help bring awareness to it. So here we go with Dr. Seuss. And I'm not going to necessarily give commentary to this because I want you to be able to look at these and try to figure it out. So if you would like to pause, here we go. This is supposed to be read from upper left, upper right, bottom left, bottom right. Pay attention to the words in this one. I know it may be a little bit hard to read. This one also has a lot of like color imagery going on. There are words at the very bottom. Hopefully it's very clear to you why this is an issue. Got our next example here. There are the first two lines that are kind of boxed for you to help you out. Hopefully emphasize like what the issue is. Specific line that I think is probably the clearest is the with helpers who all wear their eyes at a slant. Another example. Okay. If that was a lot, please pause, take a break, step away, go pet an animal, step outside. Um, Dr. Seuss unfortunately has a lot of stereotypes that are incredibly like demeaning and dehumanizing. Um, while that is incredibly depressing, there are a lot of really good options at various grade levels that we can work on trying to incorporate to kind of counteract some of the stereotypes that we've been brought up with. So these are specifically picture book options. I'm not going to necessarily give you summaries, but I'm going to highlight some of them that I know are really, really good and that students have enjoyed in the past. The water protectors has been has won quite a few awards. A lot of students really enjoy it. It is more of an indigenous perspective, so a Native American perspective in the US. In the upper section, there's Hair Love. There's also a short video to go with Hair Love. Very, very good for like more natural African American hairstyles. The Proudest Blue has been really good. Fry Bread is also like very, very beautiful. And I think there's actually recipes in the back. If you are somebody that enjoys like baking, cooking, that might be like a fun thing for you to like touch on. The Last Stop on Market Street is also a really, really good option. There's dealing with like public transportation and stuff like that. So it's a different type of like class access in terms of diversity. So these are picture books. We've got early chapter books, which a lot of you identified in your reader autobiography that you're like, they're not quite like picture books, but they're not full on novels. Some of the examples here, oh, where did it go? Where's it at? The Sophia Martinez series is really, really good. Juana and Lucas is really good and really funny. The Desmond Cole Ghost Patrol is also like a really funny kind of like easy access entry into kind of like the mystery thriller aspect of things. I think those are it. For the ones that I know that have done really well with students in the past. But again, there's a ton more options that are here. And even just like looking at the covers and the different types of identity that you should be able to see, there is a stark difference between what you might have grown up with. We got middle grade options, and because this is closer to kind of my area of expertise, I might identify a few more than previously, but that's just because I've been able to engage with them more. Blended is really good about having multi-ethnic background. Front desk is kind of an immigrant experience. The crossover is sports and poetry, which is a really interesting combination. Um, New Kid is a graphic novel. You'll have it as an option to read about being a new kid at school and kind of like the things that you deal with there, but also like class issues. That has been like really successful with a lot of students. Tristan Strong punches a hole in the sky. If you are a like sci-fi fantasy person, there's a really like interesting newer series that is doing a lot with like kind of counteracting things. Esperanza Rising is kind of more of like, I think it's probably the oldest one out of these. Um, Still does a really, really good job of providing a different look into um, like a non-white perspective. Prairie Lotus is pretty good. Anything that is by Linda Sue Park is usually pretty good with its Asian representation and also like Native American representation. Um, but again, these are just some of the options of like getting better, of having better representation. So for this week, you are picking two different picture books from the list, and you have those two different article readings. They're picture books, so it shouldn't be too heavy. As you are reading, I want you to be aware of like who is in these stories, what groups of people are being represented, um, what can people that read, whether they're younger or older, take away from stories like these. And I don't mean like what are the lessons? I mean, what can you take away? What can readers take away by seeing these characters as these main characters in these stories? You'll want to look at like how do these stories challenge the idea of a single story about a group of people. That's going to go directly back to Adichie's speech. Um, you might want to think about like what happens with the message of the books when there are some children that are not represented in the book options. So a lot of you hit on week 2, week 3, um, that you wanted more disability representation. So you might want to kind of, that might be something to like revisit for this week. You might want to think about why the text is written the specific way that it is. Again, it's picture booky, so you might want to think about like the construction of the picture book that we did like third week. Like the symmetry, asymmetry, how is it literally constructed? Are the words working with the images? Would it have been more effective if it was kind of constructed in a different way? The next one, like who is silenced and heard here, it did like what group of people who typically are silenced are represented, but also like what group of people are being silenced who we usually hear from. You do not have to address all of these. These are just to kind of get you thinking as you're reading. Um, you might want to think about like what are different things that different types of readers could get out of reading this book, like whether the situation or the event or the specific character. That might be hard for you. If you are more in the education lens, that one might be a better question to try to like sit with. Um, and the last one is kind of like a big summary-ish of like what this has been. Like it's asking you what or whose specific view of the world or specific kinds of behaviors are seen as normal that might not be seen as normal if it was written from a different group's perspective. Again, these are just to kind of get you thinking as you are reading.